Let's head into the last empty places with author Peter Stark and broadcaster Jimmy Mack. A podcast about the adventure of getting lost to find yourself. Join Peter and Jimmy as they head into places where sometimes the only lights are the stars, and the only guide, your wits.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody out there. Hey, Peter Stark, how are you?
Eager to talk.
Jimmy Mack here. One of the things that we're going to do on the Last Empty Places is we're going to move back and forth between, to some degree, metaphor and reality, to some degree between fact and fiction. I thought it might be really fun today to talk about the concept of loss beyond just simply not knowing where the hell you are on a map, but the metaphorical big picture of loss. There's a wonderful book, and by the way, one of the other things I hope we'll be able to do on a regular basis here is recommend great books, not only Peter's great books, but the books of other authors who have dealt with both metaphorically and geographically getting lost. I mean, I know you spent your life digging into books about, dudes that took ships too far into iceberg fields, people who wandered too far into the desert or too far into the jungles. Teddy Roosevelt's got a couple of great stories like that, one of which almost takes his life. There's a lot of great books out there, but I wanted to start with a quote from Lost in the Cosmos, the last self-help book by Walker Percy, who most people know as the author of The Moviegoer, which is considered one of the great books of the 20th century, or as they say, I heard it once compared to an adult version of Catcher in the Rye, where the main character is actually a good person. All right, so here's the quote from Lost in the Cosmos. The difference between a non-suicide and an ex-suicide leaving the house for work at 8 o'clock on an ordinary morning. The non-suicide is a little traveling suck of care, sucking care with him from the past and being sucked toward care in the future. His breath is high in his chest. The ex-suicide opens his front door, sits down on the steps and laughs. Since he has the option of being dead, he has nothing to lose by being alive. It is good to be alive. He goes to work because he doesn't have to.
That's a great quote.
If you read Percy's quote in book and chapter in full, what you'll discover is the non-suicide is lost, the ex-suicide is not. And he doesn't mean people should actually try to commit suicide, far from it. What he actually argues is that one should emotionally and mentally commit suicide and then strand oneself. He actually uses this metaphor on a deserted island, and he talks about the idea of being in a shipwreck and having the sudden realization that you awake on a desert island, but there's enough stuff on the island to survive, and a whole new life begins.
That's perfect. It's what we've talked about in the last couple of episodes about that getting lost is a transformative experience. And, he's addressing that so eloquently. Getting lost, it's really starting anew. That you get lost so you can begin again. And he uses the metaphor of suicide and ex-suicide, but as you say, it's the equivalent of finding yourself on a remote lone island, and you're rebuilding from the start. And so it's, in a way, you don't have any baggage. You're stranded on this island. You didn't bring any baggage with you. So I think that's a really apt way of thinking about this concept of getting lost, when we say in this metaphorical or metaphysical sense.
I love the idea of losing your baggage, because I've noticed that there are two kinds of people who have their baggage not arrive at the airport when they fly someplace.
Right.
And one of them absolutely spends the rest of their time complaining about their baggage, and the other one just kind of improvs their way to victory. Now, look, there are people who are trying to start a new life who, need their baggage, that might have had money in it, might have, a whole bunch of other stuff too. But I've known a lot of people who have lost everything and came out the other side laughing. The Richard Brimsley Sheridan, the playwright, was also a member of Parliament. And he actually, at one point, his theater burned down. And the theater that he built burned down, and they found him out front of it as they were fighting the fire, and he was having a glass of port. And somebody said to him, what are you doing? He said, well, if a man can't sit in front of his fire with a good drink, I don't know what the world is coming to. And there is a sense that there are some people who, when they finally do lose everything, or really lose their way, or really lose their bearings, that they somehow manage to say, you know what? I can view this as two ways: desperately trying to get back to a place that doesn't exist anymore, as happened with Katrina for so many people, or happened with a lot of people with the wildfires in California. We can go on, people in war-torn countries. There are other people who just simply, walk away, lost, and then they are found.
When you bring up that image of people losing their baggage at the airport, or it doesn't arrive, that it brings to my mind so much of the concept of improvisation.
Okay, you got to unpack that. We've talked about this before. I'm going to make you unpack the idea of improvisations.
Well, I mean, basically, the path you thought you were on at the airport or wherever, the expected arc of your journey is suddenly shattered. And how do you react to that? And the thing I think about is okay, it's improvisation, that you are put yourself in a state of mind where you are ready to create anew, start from scratch. And that I think a few episodes ago we talked about this personal experience I had getting stuck on this cliff face in the Swan Mountain.
Oh yeah, you talked about it, because I'm never going to forget it.
And so and really starting to freak out, and then like sitting down and smoking a cigarette, and then looking down, looking sideways, and then thinking, well, maybe I should look up, and looking up, and then seeing there was like a keyhole through the cliff face that came out the other side, this really narrow kind of fin of rock ridge. And that moment was really a transformative moment in my own life, because it showed me that rather than freaking out and thrashing around in this situation that could be life-threatening, in fact was life-threatening, that to find that moment of calmness, and in that moment of calmness to look for an alternative, and an alternative route, an alternative way, alternative anything. And that made all the difference in how I think of those moments when something's going really wrong, when you're really disoriented, when you want to panic.
You want to panic. That's a great way of putting that too. You want to panic, because there's a moment where we don't always choose when panic pours in, and sometimes we've got to fight it away. But sometimes we do have a moment, and I think you know what I'm talking about, where I can choose to panic and I choose not to, because panic is death. That slow creep in of you in that moment. I was in a car one time under a bypass, and a flash flood happened, and the water began to slowly creep up next to me and the woman who was in the car with me, and we were in bumper to bumper traffic when this happened, Peter. And she looked at me and she said, "I think this is how people die."
Oh man.
And I went, "We're not doing that." I rolled down the window and I said, "This car means nothing to me. You and I mean everything." I said, "If this thing begins to come in through the bottom of the door, we're out the car.
We're out of here.
We're out the car."
Yeah.
But that's what panic is. You have to make a choice not to panic. And I know you've been there. I'm sorry. You were looking up and you had a moment of clarity and you chose not to panic. Please go on.
No, that's exactly what we're talking about. That's the point I'm making. And it's the same point you're making with the car. And that the choice not to panic, and it's a very I think it's a very conscious choice. And I like to think I could do that in any situation. I probably can't, but I've developed kind of an instinct to go there when that sense of panic comes on. Is to say, okay, look for the calm spot, and look for the center. And what I've tried to do is, literally center it in my core. Physical core, gut. Think of the calm center, and then everything you do works out from there. in a way, it's like that's your compass point, is that calm center of yourself. And no matter what's happening around me, I can go back to that calm center of myself and uh, and guide my way from there.
I'm gonna make a whole bunch of movie references throughout this particular episode, since most of the time in The Last Empty Places is not going to be spent talking about movies. It's going to be spent actually doing the things. There's a moment at the end of the first Christopher Nolan Batman film where Batman makes a decision. Bruce Wayne makes a decision, having once saved who he thought was his friend Ra's al Ghul. He says, the villain says, "Have you finally found the courage and the strength to do what is necessary?" And he goes, I still won't kill you, but I don't have to save you." And he ends up leaving the train, leaving the guy trapped in the train. There's a moment where he looks at the oncoming wreck, and it's a nice piece of acting in a blockbuster where Liam Neeson, of course, just kind of sees he's going to die, and he just kind of centers himself and closes his eyes.
Okay. Well,
and it's really calm. It's really calm, and it's really, really centered. And there is something, and this goes back to the work of Hemingway as well, the idea of grace under pressure, the idea of finding that moment of, attempting to kind of force the flow state in moments of great crisis. I do want to distinguish something too. There is one kind of lost that needs to be kind of, I think, the metaphorical kinds of lost, because this one is actually real, but it's physically real. So, you've heard the expression in a fog or a mist or, lost my bearings. Sometimes that stuff is genuinely physical. And the panic that often sets in with stuff like vertigo, people who get genuine vertigo, like inner ear problems and all that kind of stuff, or have cognitive decline, or have moments where, neurodivergence or schizophrenia, the panic around that and the rejection of people who fall into those places. We've gotten a lot better in our society about this, but think about the way those people were rejected in the 19th and 18th century, people who fell into those kind of states. There was a real sense of unease. Somebody breaks their leg, we want to help them out. You know what I'm saying? Somebody, breaks their back, somebody, somebody has lung cancer, people rally around them. Somebody goes a little off their bearing, somebody gets mentally lost, and people just run in the other direction. And I think they do it because it is the one loss where the difficulty of doing exactly what you talked about. Because the thing is, every other kind of loss, whether it's a lack of direction or purpose or a disconnection from others or being genuinely lost, I think your idea of centering yourself works beautifully. What happens when we get to T.S. Eliot and the center does not hold, when there is no,
center? Yes, exactly. That we can go, that metaphorical concept of getting lost, and to more examples from literature. I've talked about this a little bit, that getting lost, well, in the quote you just read, getting lost as being placed down on a desert island by yourself. And there are these examples from literature and also very popular television shows about people doing just that. One is the classic novel, The Lord of the Flies, where these boys are shipwrecked on an island, and when they're like 12, 13, 14, 15, in that sorting out who you are phase of life, of puberty and adolescence. And they have to create their own society from scratch. And the tragedy is that it ends up being this brutal dictatorial society. It's a might makes right kind of society that ends up emerging from this kind of virgin start at a new beginning of society, and it's all wrong the way it unfolds.
Well, yeah, and and think about the fact of the matter is that even though it's on an island, which should be a grand adventure, it ends up becoming nothing of an adventure at all, because as we learn later on in the book, that the beast, or what they think is the beast, there's a monster out there, the beast, that those who gain power use as a way of kind of keeping people. Boy, how do they end up on an island? that most of them end up not exploring, too afraid to leave their camp area because they are intimidated by the beast. And then, of course, what happens? The mystic, the young man Simon in that book, remember, he goes up to the mountain to go confront the beast, ends up confronting the pig on the they put the pig's head on the stick where the flies buzz around it, and he ends up talking to the Lord of the Flies. But then he goes up to the mountain to go confront the beast that scared so many people. Well, it turns out it's a crashed airplane, and it's the corpse of a pilot.
Wow. Okay. You remember this plot a lot better than I do.
Well, but this is terrifying, though, Peter. He comes down. You want to talk about allegory? Simon comes down from the mountain to tell people that the beast is not real, to tell them the good news, and they kill him. They accuse him of being the beast, and they kill him in the confusion and in the rage. Simon comes down to spread the good news, and that is, we have nothing to fear. Be not afraid.
I can't. They finally break out of it. I'm thinking. What? Don't they finally overcome the dictator? No.
Oh, okay. No, they don't. No, what happens is, it's terrible ending. It's a terrible ending. Well, it's not terrible. They get saved, but the Jack, who is us. There is the Piggy is the intellectual. The kid they call Piggy is the intellectual, and there's a whole bunch of bad actors on the island. The gang of bullies that get it. So Jack at the end is running for his life. They're coming to kill him, and they're running down the beach. He's running, and he finally can't run anymore, and exhaustedly collapses, and he thinks he's going to die, and then he realizes he's collapsed on top the boot of a British sailor. Oh. And there's a ship right off the coast that has come to rescue them.
Yeah, I knew there was a ship involved. So that going up the mountain, now, that's a great physical image for the metaphorical thing that we're talking about. If you are able to, in a way, conquer that inner fear and take that step into the unknown, willing to bear the consequences, that is such an important thing to be able to do. And it's such an important way of getting your bearings, of finding your bearings, finding yourself. It's really an act of kind of faith and will. And there's so many elements that go into it. In a way, you talk about abandon. It's like the quote that you were reading of Walker Percy about the suicide and the ex-suicide. Well, it's doing the suicide thing. It's like saying, I'm going to take the step, and I might not survive. And when I say I might not survive, I mean not necessarily physically, which, although you can be in situations where that is true, but I'm going to take this step. I might not survive professionally. I might not survive economically yet, and that to have that willingness to take that step and confront the unknown and the fear of the unknown.
This might break me.
And then the character in The Lord of the Flies does it, Simon, and finds out, well, it's not this terrible thing. I've tamed the beast by identifying it, by taking the risk and confronting it, and willing to take the consequences of confronting it. So I think that's so much at the heart of what we're talking about, at least what I'm thinking about when we're talking about the transformational experience of being lost.
Yeah, and the idea that it's like, and to remind people, it is one of the most, terrific literary devices there is, because Tolstoy says the two great beginnings to every story is either a man leaves home to go on a journey or a stranger comes to town. And it's just mirror images of the same story. And the idea that, there's got to be at some point that stasis prevents us from having actual stories, that somebody chooses to do something. And there's a really great thing as we begin with this third episode. It's a really great term from theater called the inciting incident. The idea that there must be an incident that incites, that gets us going, and if you go through every great play, if you go through every great novel, actually, if you go through anything that has a narrative structure, there is a moment, and that Joseph Campbell hero of 1,000 faces starts to pop up into, the call to adventure. But what is the inciting incident?
It's sort of a crisis incident is what you're talking about. It's a crisis in the main characters.
Well, yeah. And I mean, it's like, I keep thinking about Popeye the Sailor Man, his famous thing when he takes all the abuse and all the, the whoever's picking on the sailor, what does he always say?
I can't stand no more.
And I can't stand no more. Exactly. And then he opens up the can of spinach. Something incites him. he gets incited to take that can of spinach and, open up a can of whoop ass on the Room or Bluto or Brutus, whatever they call him in whatever particular cartoon we're talking about, defend the honor of olive oil, make sure that Wimpy gets his hamburgers. But something incites the incident. And that's kind of the call to adventure that plays itself through in a lot of these stories. And it really is, you talk about the idea of I could break here, but the idea that every single adventure doesn't begin with the purpose of getting lost, but it does begin with the possibility of getting lost. And if you don't accept that, you will find yourself in a real panic point when it happens. I think your point about practicing finding your center, and I'm wondering, by the way, just from your own personal experience, people do meditation, people, practice mindfulness and all that kind of stuff. Do you think that's actually helpful to think about worst case scenario? What is it? The football coach, Nick Saban, they used to call him he was a pessimist, but he was a pessimist who believed in action, that just because you've gone through every one of the worst case scenarios doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but that you should go through all the worst case scenarios so that when they arrive, you are ready for them. Do you think as an explorer and adventurer, you can have you can meditate on a trip that you're going to take and imagine the challenges or the unexpected?
Exactly. I mean, I think you're right on it. And when I say finding your center, I've experienced that more in my real life, sitting at a desk or wherever, than necessarily at a huge adventure. But it certainly has happened during a huge adventure, plenty, with big physical consequences involved. With the, in your regular everyday life, personal life, professional life, economic life, whatever, emotional life, it's the technique that I found works for me is almost exactly what you're describing, is to imagine every worst consequence, that, everything as I know it is destroyed, and think, okay, I can still be here and still have a center. That's what I try to bring to that moment of trying to calm myself in the face of all this uncertainty. And, I have a tendency towards, anxiety anyway, and I can imagine a lot of bad scenes. And so it's
you actually imagine, what is it, 12 or 13 of them in Last Breath?
I think it's 11. 11 great ways to die in the wilderness is what I jokingly call that book, Last Breath. And yeah, so I can imagine these things easily, and vividly, being able to, imagine them and then overcome that, go beyond that and kind of accept it is important.
Well, yeah, and it's like, the great, I'm not sure of the veracity of it, but, today is a good day to die.
Oh, right.
But not today. And the idea that it's like, yes, it's a good day to die. Doesn't mean I have to. Doesn't mean I should. Doesn't mean I want to go out and get myself killed. It does mean, though, that I want to live my life to the fullest so that when this moment comes, I am ready for it, that I have made choices and I understand them. Okay, so I've been talking about the idea of metaphors for lost. And, one of the biggest questions I have, because you talked about this, one of the reasons you go out when you go out is at least when you were younger, you were hoping to find, even though you didn't even know what the question was, answers. Right?
Exactly.
And this is so important. I wanted to ask you, when you go out on these adventures, do you think it's wise if other people choose to go on adventures and are truly lost? I mean, if it's a controlled environment, I think about the movie City Slickers, where they go to one of those, cattle roundup kind of things. You know what I'm saying? Where it's like they pay for the cattle roundup.
Right.
Things really do go wrong quickly in that movie. But is it healthy or wise for somebody who is truly lost to go do that? And I'm asking that question genuinely because Teddy Roosevelt is truly lost when he goes to the Badlands. He is truly lost. He has lost his wife,
oh my God, yeah,
and his mother,
yeah,
on the same night. And he's suddenly faced with having to raise a little girl by himself.
My immediate answer is yes. And I mean, I've been in that situation somewhat. I'll get to that in a moment. But Teddy Roosevelt, when he goes down the what do they say, the river of doubt, a river of doubt, in a tributary of the Amazon. He's also lost his his political life, his career. He's at this kind of breaking point, and he does throw himself in a situation that now is suddenly way high risk in terms of what could physically happen to him. Way high risk, and he almost dies of a fever in the Amazon. He comes very close.
That's everybody's big terror too. You get a fever, you get something, you get sick in the wilderness in such a way that it clouds your judgment. It's such a dangerous place because you can't center yourself when you're not in your right mind, when you've lost your mind.
You can, yeah. I mean, exactly. And I'll tell a story from my own life, which is it's pretty personal, but I survived it. When I was in college, my family, in my sophomore year in college, I had a good freshman year, and then my sophomore year was kind of unraveling. And my family had a business, family business. I'd be the fourth generation to take it over. It was a candy making business, and yet I was not enthusiastic about going into the candy making business. I was more interested in writing something, creative. And in the fall term of my sophomore year, it was a really dark time. This is 1973. The oil crisis has hit. Nixon's going down in Watergate. The Watergate hearings have just been concluded or ongoing. And my father thought he was going broke at the candy company, and he attempted suicide. And so that was a real shock to me. And it was one of these things that, that the family didn't want to talk about it, or didn't want it to be, kind of common knowledge. And so I was sort of sitting on this, this kind of big traumatic emotional blow, and not really having anybody to talk to about it. And I became more and more unraveled, trying to decide if I was going to go into the family business, or if I was going to go pursue writing, or what I was going to do. And meanwhile, my academic career was unwinding. And finally, by that spring, I just said, I got to get out of here. I can't, it's overwhelming. And I said, I'm just going to go to the most remote part of the world I can find. And that's how I ended up. Initially, I was going to go to the Andes, and then I had an anthropology professor say, well, if you really want to go someplace remote with the original cultures really intact, go to the Himalayas. And I ended up it ended up being alone, traveling overland from Istanbul through Turkey, through Iran, through Afghanistan, through India, Kashmir, Pakistan, Nepal. And it was emotionally like a brutal experience. I just turned inward. I hardly talked, and I was just in this different state for 4 or 5 or 6 months. And yet in the course of it, there were moments when I started seeing how this, kind of seeing a way forward. And I think I was just talking to Amy about this the other day, but at one point I was sitting on the stern of a big ferry going through the Indian Ocean from southern India up to Bombay, which is a like 24-hour trip. And I was sitting at the stern railing by myself, and just watching that white wake unfold in the brilliant blue water of the Indian Ocean on a sunny day. And, the big waves kind of curling out of the wake with beautiful foam. And I just had a kind of revelation right in that moment, thinking, if I want to do something creative, sculpting, I could really do that with words. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a novel, which is what, I was thinking, well, I could be a novelist. And I had a professor that say, I don't think that's going to work out for you. But I started thinking, well, I can sculpt creatively with words, and I can start with journalism. And then I can take a step from there and see where it goes. And so that was kind of the beginning of my plan of where I was going to start when I got back to home, to the U.S., to Dartmouth College, to Wisconsin, the family, the candy business, was I now had this centering point that I hadn't had before. And so, someone would ask me, what are you interested in for a future career job? And I say, well, I'm actually interested in journalism. And it was suddenly like it kind of gave me this identity where that I didn't have before. And so like the candy business, and my father, who was like in this emotional, complete turmoil for a while. I mean, he bounced back pretty fast.
He told you something.
Yeah. Well, he did. I think he told me that one thing he told me is that this is not an easy thing to be running a business where you're responsible for 100 or 150 people. And when it looks like it's going to crash, there's a huge, weight of responsibility that you take.
I understand.
And you, yeah, Jimmy, you totally understand. And, in this case, it was not true that he was not really in his business in danger of crashing, but it was basically what had happened it was the first, this is so germane to today. It was the first oil crisis, energy crisis, when OPEC barricaded oil shipments. It was in the wake of a Middle East conflict. That's literally 50 years ago. And that what happened in the wake, in the wake of that war, OPEC, the Arab producing states, embargoed oil, drove up the price of oil really high, really fast. And that inflation just soared instantly. Prices soared instantly.
Stagflation, my brother, stagflation.
And so what my father was reacting to, it just took a few weeks. And, candy, you use a lot of sugar, and sugar prices doubled like overnight. And, you can imagine as a candy manufacturer, suddenly your basic raw material of what you make doubles. And what does your bottom line look like now? And, it really got to my father. It turned out, in the long run, he was eventually diagnosed as being manic depressive. And, he was a great guy in so many ways. He had that depressive aspect, but he also had the manic aspect that took him on amazing adventures in his youth and beyond. So that I bring up that really personal journey as an example of being utterly lost in where I was in my sophomore year of college, and everything just seemed to be unraveling, and just saying, okay, I'm going to throw myself into the most remote place I can find and see what I learn there and see what happens.
It's interesting, by the way, the author of Young Washington is here, about a petulant kid who wanders into the wilderness and comes back to the other side as George Washington. We've been talking about Teddy Roosevelt, who, as a young man, full of vim, vigor, and spit and piss and vinegar, loses his wife and his mother on the same night, heads off into the wilderness. It's a remarkable story too. I don't know if you know this, but that Teddy Roosevelt's journey from into the wilderness and then back to become the commissioner of police of New York City and the modern inventor of the detective, of the modern police department, is who Bob Kane modeled Batman off of.
Really?
It's who the Shadow is. The Shadow and Batman are both modeled off of. They both ultimately said that it's Roosevelt's journey where he comes back a man of fire. He comes back revitalized and full of life. And in your way, I've been dying to hear the Peter Stark origin story about how you were lost and then were found and were blind but could see and were dead and come back to life. So that's a pretty good story, dude.
That was definitely it. It was really powerful. And I remember getting back to college and people saying, after I'd been there for a few months, saying, yeah, when you got back from your going to the Himalayas, you were so weird. and it was like, I was just silent and inward. And then, I got past it. And then, then I started on a track, started on a pursuit. And here I am today, that I never would have guessed I would have ended up here. But it was like finding that first step of a path. And I tell this to younger writers all the time. There's no clear path. you just have to take a first step and feel if it's the right direction or not.
I also want to add a little kind of thing to everybody listening there. Even if you aren't a young writer, even if you are an old writer who is just getting started, no matter what your age is, as long as your wits are about you, you can always take that new step into a new adventure. You can always make the choice to get lost. It's kind of a religious belief of mine that you can make a choice at any point to get lost. Now, I do think that if you love people and care about them, you have to share your designs. You can't walk out of your life, especially if there are people who depend on you and care on you. But there are people, I mean, Peter, you know them. I live with one. You have one in your life where you can go to these people and say, I'm a little stuck. Things aren't happening the way they should be happening. We got to go find something. We got to go make a change. And a friend of mine called me last night, say exactly that, resigned from her job, and it was just killing her. And she doesn't know what the hell she's going to do, but she knew that she wasn't going to do that, and that it was wearing her down. And and that's one of the great things about being here too, is that you can just kind of pick up your stuff and head out a little further out west. We're going to run out of time here, and I wanted to make some time for you to kind of talk about something that's really, really fun. This is really cool. You have a group. You have an over the hill soccer league. What's it called?
Oh, we call it the Old Boys, the Missoula Old Boys. It's actually called the Peas Farm Old Boys because there's an organic teaching farm right next to our field called the Peas Farm. So our official logo has a flying pig on it, and like those soccer badges, it's a flying pig. And it's the Peas Farm Old Boys. So that's our league. It's a pickup game. It's a group. It's everybody has to be over 40. And I was one actually who founded it, like more than 15 years ago, when I realized I couldn't keep up with the younger guys who are, the 20 somethings who are playing or even the 18 somethings who are playing in the city league, the organized city league where there's no age limit whatsoever or restrictions. So I started this as a pickup game, and it grew instantly, and it became this sort of cult. And as it is today,
they've rallied to it. And you have a little adventure, and I'm saying little in the sense of I'm not saying in that what I call the condescending way that brothers tell each other. How's your little book coming, buddy? No, I mean, but it's a contained adventure. You guys are going to spend the summer rebuilding a bathroom, right?
So the Tom Sawyer trick about whitewashing the fence and saying, this is really fun, and convincing his friends to help out. It's sort of in that same.
But this is really fun, though. What you guys have planned is really fun. So
I think it'll be really fun. Amy's family has a crazy ramshackle cabin complex on an island in Puget Sound, right on the beach. It's just beautiful and huge old growth around it. But her dad, now long gone, built, kind of tacked on this bathroom. The original first plumbing. Probably in the 60s or 70s. And, the bathroom is there's the Pacific Northwest rainforest, and things rot fast. And at this point, the bathroom is falling apart so severely that you can sit on the toilet and it rocks back and forth.
The Pacific Northwest, where the wood goes bad, but the milk can sit on the windowsill forever.
That's right. Yeah. Permanent mold. Yes. Mildew. And I'd invited some of my soccer player buddies and their families a couple of years ago out to the island just to hang out and play beach soccer. And we have a rival game against another team in the Seattle area that we play every year. And so this coming year, I've invited them out, all these guys and all their families. And the project is we're going to tear off that bathroom and rebuild it as the Old Boys team and their families.
A character building exercise.
It was a character building activity. But the building will only be a few hours a day, but there'll be a lot of beach time. And then the World Cup is actually happening in Seattle at the same time.
And I think every man really wants to make sure that every other man has the ability to practice stern constitutionalism. So I think that everybody's always willing to rally and help people get a really good bathroom.
Yeah, it's an important skill to have too.
It's a place that people say, I need to help with that. I need to help my friend Peter. Peter, we're out of time. Like I said, this just kills me, man. I look up and I'm like, how did that happen?
Yeah, how did that happen?
Peter Stark, Jimmy Mack, Last Empty Places. Clare Marie will explain all the particulars now.
The Last Empty Places is a Planet Clare production and lives at peterstarkauthor.com. Listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all your favorite platforms. Write to us on the contact page at peterstarkauthor.com. And in the meantime, head on out and find an adventure.